space mystery brewing. Newly unearthed audio revealing astronauts may have heard music. Big questions this morning.
It began as a whisper no one was supposed to hear. 3 amateur radio operators on 3 continents intercepted the same pulse buried in cosmic static. The frequency was the hydrogen line, the quietest channel in the universe, tuned to Andromeda's exact coordinates. What looked like noise turned into structure. What sounded like chance turned into purpose. And when they finally decoded what was inside that signal, their excitement vanished. The data was too clean, the pattern too deliberate, and the realization too late. Humanity had been noticed, and whoever was listening had already spoken. The signal appears. In a basement outside Cleveland, the night air pressed against the window, and the only sound inside the room came from the quiet hum of a power supply and the occasional click of a keyboard. The waterfall display on a modest monitor rolled like a slow river of color until a razor-thin line stood upright in the band that every radio astronomer knows by heart. It sat at 1,420.40575 megahertz, exactly where neutral hydrogen sings. The operator stared, reached for the recorder, and wrote the time with a careful hand that had recorded 1,000 ordinary nights and almost nothing like this. The spike did not fade, it did not flutter, and it did not wander away from the center of the line. He called into a small Discord channel where the voices were familiar, where jokes about antennas and gain were part of a long routine, and where new anomalies always arrived with equal parts skepticism and delight. Minutes later, a Berlin developer with a home-built receiver steered his dish toward the same patch of sky and watched a line grow in the same place, its measured drift matching the motion of Andromeda as it climbed. 6 hours after that, in a cluttered garage near Melbourne, where a battered logbook sat open on a bench, a third operator caught the same spike as the galaxy cleared the horizon. The timestamps aligned to fractions of a second once the logs were corrected to GPS time, and the 3 traces laid on top of one another like layers of a single thought. For an hour, the talk was quick and technical as they tried to push the result back toward coincidence. They checked for local interference and found none. They examined power line harmonics and saw nothing at that frequency. They compared antenna side lobes, system temperatures, and calibration tones, and no ordinary explanation would stay on its feet. The quiet that followed did not feel like celebration. It felt like the beginning of a responsibility. If a whisper could cross half a galaxy, who was it meant to reach? And why did it arrive 3 times on the same night to 3 different places that had never met except through a wire and a screen? If 3 identical detections were not enough, what would happen when the world of listeners turned its attention to the same frequency at the same time? The pattern and the fear. The channel that usually carried casual talk became a command center, where lines of UTC time marched beside plots of frequency and signal to noise. Screens filled with spectrograms and calibration notes. A volunteer in Tokyo cross-checked satellite passes, aircraft transponders, and catalogued transmitters, and nothing with a registered signature approached the hydrogen line. Amateur stations from Canada, Spain, South Africa, and New Zealand rotated their dishes to Andromeda's position, and when the elevation cleared the local horizon, several of them saw the same pencil-thin spike rising from the noise. The detections were staggered by Earth's rotation exactly as the sky would demand. The signal arrived in a pattern that felt like the path of a lighthouse sweeping across a coast that could not yet see its own shoreline. An older engineer in Ohio wrote a small program to mark the peaks and count the intervals. The log produced a number that made his hand hesitate over the keyboard. There were 1,679 pulses in a complete cycle. That number breaks cleanly into the primes 23 and 73. The channel went still as a second operator in Berlin rebuilt the stream into a grid of 23 rows by 73 columns. When the binary rendered, a crude image formed of a spiral with arms bent, the way a barred galaxy bends its light. Along the edge ran a column where values matched the atomic numbers of hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus. In the center sat a cluster of marks repeating in a rhythm that no one could square with noise. They argued as people who care about the truth always argue when a result is too clean. Pattern recognition can trick the mind, and coincidence can imitate intention when the sample is small. Yet the grid looked less like chance with every recheck. The spiral remained, the chemical sequence remained, the rhythm remained, and the frequency never left the center of the hydrogen line. The question turned from whether something had spoken to what it had chosen to say, and once that door opened, another question waited on the other side. If the message was shaped for a mind like ours, how many times had it been sent before it finally crossed paths with ears that could understand it? The physics and the impossible distance. Excitement cooled into calculation because physics does not care how a discovery feels. At 2.5 million light-years, the gulf between Andromeda and Earth stretches across numbers that refuse to sit quietly in the head. The free space path loss at the hydrogen line is so severe that even the most powerful radar humanity has ever built would fall into silence long before it left the local neighborhood of the Milky Way. An isotropic broadcast that radiates in all directions would require energy on the order of a star to survive the trip with any structure intact, which is the sort of requirement that reduces wishful thinking to ash. The arithmetic changed only if the transmission was shaped and focused so narrowly that the beam crossed intergalactic space with surgical accuracy. A transmitter that could span the size of a city or even a world could build a phased array that points a needle of radio light with a precision that defies daily experience. With gain that large and with a beam that tight, the required power drops into a range that is still enormous but no longer absurd for a civilization that manages energy far beyond planetary scales. The beam would need to be aimed not at the center of our galaxy, but at a moving star and the small planets orbiting it, and it would need to be held steady long enough to be found by receivers that were never designed for such a test. The thought was not comforting. A signal of that character implies a sender who knows where to look and how to keep looking. It implies a map with our coordinates inked clearly on it. It says in mathematics that no biology can misunderstand, that the laws of physics we have learned to read are the same laws another intelligence can bend to its will. If someone could do this, what else could they do? And what kind of intent chooses to write on the hydrogen page that every listening culture will eventually learn to read? Verification and history. The group shifted from thrill to procedure because extraordinary claims die without discipline. They archived raw IQ files rather than screenshots. They attached system temperature tables, antenna patterns, and gain curves. They saved weather station logs and receiver noise figures. They exported GPS-disciplined clock traces to prove that timing matched within the sliver of a second that separates measurement from myth. They recorded null frames with the dishes pointed away from Andromeda to show that the spike disappeared when the sky did not cooperate. They processed the data independently on different machines with different tools, and then compared the results line by line. The result refused to change. As the files spread quietly through professional circles, older voices reminded the younger listeners that nature has embarrassed humanity more than once. In 1967, a neat pulse led to the first pulsar. In 1977, a single burst at the hydrogen line led to a margin note that still fuels debate because it never repeated. These stories are not folklore meant to suffocate imagination. They are guardrails that keep the vehicle on the road long enough to reach whatever truth waits in the next bend. The Andromeda detections did not behave like a one-time apparition. They repeated on multiple nights, in multiple hemispheres, and the frequency tracked the Doppler shift of the galaxy as it rose and set. A liaison at a university coordinated quiet follow-up and high-gain dishes that usually chase mazes and methanol lines spent a portion of their nights on M31. No press release appeared because serious work rarely announces itself until it is ready. Yet the scheduling logs told their own story as more instruments found time to listen. The amateurs watched their data step into the wider world and felt the strange mix of pride and worry that always follows a discovery that may outgrow the hands that found it. If history warns us against haste, it also reminds us that sometimes the sky does not repeat itself. Would a second season of listening bring the same chorus, or would the hydrogen line close like a door that was never meant to be open this long? The meaning and the message. The 23 by 73 grid became the canvas for nights that stretched toward morning and for minds that tried to hold skepticism and wonder at the same time without letting either spill. The spiral on the left did not match Andromeda precisely, which led some to argue that it was an emblem rather than a portrait, a symbol for any spiral galaxy rather than a map to one. Along the edge, a column of values repeated in 5 groups that corresponded to the atomic numbers of the elements that build life as we know it. The brightness of those groups pulsed with a period that might encode ratios, and those ratios hinted at constants that show up wherever mathematics and physics share a table. In the center, the cluster that had seemed like noise arranged itself under a different decoding into a ladder that twisted from one corner to another, which pushed the room toward talk of helices and bonds. Another operator found that if the grid was read by rows and then by columns, the sequence of on and off fell into patterns that resembled a simple checksum, which would be a way to protect the message from distortion while it crossed the emptiness between stars. A linguist joined the call and said that if someone wanted to build a first contact grammar, they would choose primes, elemental numbers, and self-verifying blocks, because any mind that can hold a radio can test them. No one claimed certainty because certainty is a poor companion in rooms where only evidence should speak. Yet the combination of universal mathematics and chemistry argued for intention with a weight that pushed back against doubt. If a culture on the far side of intergalactic space wanted to signal intelligence to anything that could learn, this is the way they would do it. The grid read like a handshake with the mathematics that governs every place where matter gathers itself into thinking forms. An introduction that carries chemistry says we share the same building blocks. An introduction that carries checksums says we know data can rot as it travels. An introduction that uses the hydrogen line says we know where you will eventually listen. If this was a greeting, it was powerful, and if it was not a greeting, what other kind of message did one send when one pointed a beam across 2.5 million years? The time problem. Someone finally gave words to the fact that had been walking quietly beside them since the first night. Light from Andromeda takes 2.5 million years to arrive. The pulses that raised the hair on the backs of their necks began their journey when the ancestors of modern humans were not yet telling stories around fires. The senders, if they were biological, are dust. The cities that built the transmitter, if there were cities, are ruins dissolved into the soil of a world that is now older by spans of time that turn language into a small thing. What reached Earth felt like communication, but it behaved like archaeology. It was a message in a sealed bottle that the ocean of space carried to a shore no one could have predicted with a mind that still existed. That realization did not diminish the evidence, it deepened it. Proof of intelligence does not require a handshake, only a structure that cannot be explained away by accident or noise. The amateurs found themselves holding a fossil that contained not bone, but intention. The grid did not say hello in any human tongue. It said something that translates to, "We were here, we knew the same numbers you know, and we had the power to speak across the dark." It offered no map to a living voice and no hope for a reply within the span of human civilization. The round trip for a conversation would be 5 million years, which is longer than the life of our languages and perhaps longer than the life of our species if we do not learn to hold our world together with more care than we have shown so far. They sat with that weight and listened again, because listening was the only action left that did not betray the work. Nights passed, and the hydrogen band returned to its old silence, which felt different now because silence after speech is not the same as silence without history. The operators left their receivers tuned and their logging scripts running because a single message proves possibility, and possibility can turn a quiet sky into a place where patience is not an act of faith, but an act of discipline. If the bottle arrived once, could another follow? And if it followed, would we hear it in time to understand that the past had sent us a second gift? Verdict. The official verdict that eventually arrived from the small committee of professionals who had reviewed the amateur logs was careful and narrow, because careful and narrow is how science protects the future from the mistakes of the present. The signal that the hydrogen line was real. It was observed independently on multiple instruments on multiple nights. Its frequency drift matched the radial motion of Andromeda as it rose and set. Its modulation could be described and reproduced from the archived files. The source could not be identified. The likeliest natural explanations did not match the grid structure, and the likeliest terrestrial explanations failed under cross-checks and elevation filters. The statement ended with the word unexplained, which is the tidy drawer where science keeps the things it will not name before the evidence forces a name. That word did not erase the night when 3 small stations on 3 continents heard the same narrow song from a place no human voice can reach. It did not erase the grid that fit primes and chemistry with a confidence that felt like the work of a mind. It did not erase the mathematics that pointed toward a transmission that must have been focused and intentional if it hoped to survive the darkness between galaxies. It did not erase the truth that the senders are gone and that we were never the audience they imagined when they pressed the switch. What remained after the reports and the careful caution was the knowledge that the universe has already held more than one intelligence, and that it has carried the memory of that intelligence forward for longer than our kind has existed. The amateurs kept listening because habits become vows when they are made in rooms where something impossible once happened and refused to leave. The professionals kept a slot on their schedules for a quiet scan when the galaxy rose, because even busy instruments have time for reverence. Andromeda crossed the sky with the same slow dignity it has shown since before names and countries and telescopes, and Earth turned on its axis while receivers watched the line where hydrogen lives. The night of the first detection became a story told carefully in workshops and conferences and back channels where people who value evidence share the weight of questions that do not yet have answers. Outside those rooms, the larger world continued its routines, unaware that there is now one more reason to look up and consider that listening is not a hobby. It is a posture that a young species should learn to hold. The last word belongs to the silence that followed the last pulse, because that silence is the shape of the distance between what we know and what we hope to learn. If the universe spoke once, it may speak again, and if it never speaks again, it has already told us something that no argument can undo. We are not the first intelligence to try to leave a mark. We may not be the last. The grid on the screen is a relic that traveled for 2.5 million years and arrived intact enough to change the way a handful of determined listeners understand their place in the night. If a message can survive that journey, then patience can survive a lifetime, and patience is the instrument we will need most when the next whisper tries to cross the dark. If this story made you listen a little harder to the quiet, stay with us. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next deep space anomaly we investigate with the same discipline and the same curiosity. Tell us in the comments what you believe the Andromeda signal meant, and share where you would point a listener if you had one chance to send a message that must survive 2.5 million years. The receivers are still on, the hydrogen line is still waiting, and somewhere beyond that calm blue sky, another frequency may already be on its way.